I'm Artistic Director of the Ottawa International Writers Festival. On behalf of the festival and our partners, the Library and Archives of Canada and the Ottawa Public Library, it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live event. We're broadcasting from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Our official bookseller is Perfect Books on Elgin Street. And wherever you're tuning in, wherever you are in the world, there is an independent bookseller very near you who is probably a lovely person who would be happy to sell you between 3 and 36 copies of all 3 authors' books tonight. And please, 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 in this time right now, this is when independent booksellers and small presses and publishers and authors need our support more than ever. So please go and visit your local independent bookseller. Perfect Books on Elgin Street is our official seller, but Books on Beechwood is also fantastic. Octopus Books is fantastic right here in Ottawa. All 3 stores are open and are accepting online orders. Our host this evening is the amazing Thea Lim. Thea, as everyone will remember, is the author of An Ocean of Minutes, which is a gorgeous time travel, pandemic love story, as they all are. And I adored her book a couple of years ago. We were so lucky to have her here. And really, when we were trying to think of who could host our World as We Know It event, Thea was our first choice and thankfully our only choice because she was able to do it. And I'm so thrilled. As always, I do want to take just a quick second to thank our festival members for supporting writing through these difficult times. Your donations are what allow us to continue to pay authors and to continue to connect them to you and to keep the content going. Our virtual season will continue right through to the end of November. That's 3 to 6 events every single week. It's all free, 100%. Just go to writersfestival.org and click play. That's it for me, because we've got 2 amazing authors that we're going to hear from tonight, and I don't want to take up any more time than necessary. Thank you all so much for being here, and let's give a warm virtual welcome to our host this evening, Thea Lim.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The World as We Know It with me, Thea Lim, and with Saleema Nawaz, the author of Songs for the End of the World, and Catherine Hernandez, the author of Crosshairs. And tonight we're going to be talking about being human and writing stories in a time of disaster. And our wonderful authors are going to start us off by reading just a little bit from each of their books. So we are going to start with Saleema.
Thank you, Thea. Okay, so I'm going to read just a very short passage from close to the beginning. Elliot parked and climbed up to the 2nd floor Kung Fu studio, where he was surprised to find the door locked and a sign taped up that read, "Closed until further notice." He peered inside, but all was dark. Odd that there was no explanation nor any forewarning. In the 4 years he had been coming to the club, the gym had been closed only twice. Once when the masters had gone to China, and another time when a water pipe had burst in the unit above. Elliot returned to his car and, leaning against the driver's side door, took out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, enjoying the slow sidling up of a comfortable sleepiness as the sun warmed his face. He texted his friend Jejo, then Lucas, then Cameron, and everyone else he knew from the gym. He finally received a response from Jejo's cousin, Mina, who was studying for her gray belt. Jejo's dead. So are Cam and Lucas and the master. Teresa, Declan, Felix, and Paloma are in the hospital. It's that bad flu that's on the news. Sorry for telling you like this, but I can't talk now, and it's better that you know. Elliot drove home on autopilot, imagining himself as a robot, as though he could will away his too susceptible flesh, and counted back through the days that had passed since he'd last seen them all. It had been during an evening shift at the end of July, just before this last block of nights. He'd heard something at the precinct about a bad virus going around, but he hadn't paid much attention. How long it took to get sick, he had no idea. There was a layer of sweat between the steering wheel and his pale, clenched hands, which already felt like they belonged to someone else.
Thank you, Saleema. How familiar we all are now with those closed until further notice signs. They've become their own genre. Okay, so we are going to move on and hear from Catherine. Are you going to read to us from Crosshairs, Catherine?
Yes, I am. Hi, everybody. It's such an honor to be here with these fantastic women. Just really quickly, so Crosshairs is my book. Is about QT, BIPOC, disabled, and elderly folks fighting against a rising fascist regime in Canada only a few years into the future, following mass environmental devastation and financial collapse, much like what we are seeing now. These folks are being put into work camps and they're having to fight back. I'm going to be reading the part where they are about to head into an uprising. And Bahadur is a transmasculine person who is about to head into war with an entire team, including Firuzeh, who he once knew in the world before. Bahadur, look at me. Look at me. Firuzeh attempts to touch them, but Bahadur flinches. Bahadur starts spitfire monologuing. Firuzeh, what if this were a movie? What if we were all in a movie right now and all of us were characters? We would be as we are in real life, the first ones to get killed, the first ones to become invisible, silenced, disappeared. We're the ones, we're gonna die, we're all gonna die. Firuzeh holds Bahadur's face in her hands. No, not today. Look at me. Look at me, Bahadur, not today. Firuzeh screams, loud enough that my ears are ringing. Everybody is silent, including Bahadur. Everyone is surprised by the sound of her voice. Look at me. Look at me. Bahadur obeys, their breathing still labored, spit gathering in the corners of their mouth. Then quietly, calmly, you will not die today. You are not that character. This is not that movie. You are not invisible. You will not be silenced. You will not disappear. You will not die. You will not die. You will not die. You will not die. She says it again and again until I too believe it, until she has little breath in her body. Firuzeh models deep inhales and exhales until Bahadur's face slowly returns to its normal color and their breath slows. We all crowd around Bahadur, silent in the wake of Firuzeh's words, until Beck finally, solemnly speaks up. We need to get into the van before somebody sees us. We drive again. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I feel like I'm almost a little bit mad that Catherine has the advantage over the rest of us authors of coming from a theater background. But
oh my God, oh, I love listening to people. You all are amazing.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we are going to get to the interview portion of tonight's event. And just for those of you at home, like all of us, but those of you in your own homes, we are going to be taking questions at the end of this event. And you can either leave your questions in the Q&A tool on Zoom or by leaving a comment on Facebook. We're looking forward to those questions. Okay, so let us get to it. So I thought I would start by asking you a question about questions. I'm sure that by now you both have been asked up and down how it feels to write a novel about a global disaster and then for it to come out in the midst of a global disaster while you're trying to live through one. And I think the question that I have really is, how do you feel about that question? Do you think it's fair to think that writing a novel about global disaster somehow equips you to kind of cope with it? Or do you feel kind of just as adrift as everybody else, or maybe worse? What do you think?
Oh, Saleema, you go ahead. Oh my gosh, I'm dying to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, I mean, I think I feel just about as adrift as everyone else, I think. I mean, I feel like I should feel more prepared. I think the only way in which I actually feel more prepared is that, you know, back in March, as this was all unfolding, I felt like very familiar with all the terminology already, you know, like social distancing and flattening the curve and those kinds of things. But I actually felt like I was almost reacting against what some of my characters did. So like some of my characters, you know, sort of, they really react, like they really over prepare in a sense, you know, like they're buying flats of zoodles or alpha-getty or whatever. And I was like, I don't want to be like that, you know? So I was almost maybe doing less than I might have done otherwise, but I feel like still just as lost trying to navigate these decisions about risk and well-being.
I know, and Saleema, I was thinking that in sort of a cruelly ironic twist, there is in fact a novelist who has written a pandemic novel in your novel about surviving a pandemic. And I thought, yeah, it kind of puts you on the spot because I guess he seems to overreact. Like there's a scene where his publicist tries to come and talk to him and he comes down kind of in a full like rain slicker. But I guess he's not really overreacting, is he? Because he has better information than other people. Yeah. But then, yeah, I know you sort of feel like you want to be, I don't know, wiser than these people you've created. It puts you in a kind of.
Yeah. And this character of the writer, he's also not necessarily the most, like pristine character, you know, like there's some issues with him. And so it's like, I don't necessarily, you know, want to be like him. So,
Would you not like it? I know, not something you ever thought you would have to do, but here we are. What about you, Catherine?
Well, I don't know how it was for you, Saleema, but I felt really bad asking people to blurb the book because it's like, so we all know you're on lockdown right now. We all know that the end of the world is nigh, but can you look at our book and can you give me a blurb? Because I really want people to buy my book. Like, it just seemed so weird. Like, where were our priorities? It felt like an odd time, like almost like yes, of course this book is coming out now. And at the same time, why would this book come out now? It's what a horrible and amazing idea. Like that's what it felt like that you know, the constant feeling going through my body. And yes, like the people who are blurbing the book were doing so right at the beginning of the pandemic, like when the beginning of the lockdown here. So it must have been really terrifying for them. Did I feel prepared? You know, what's so funny is that when I was writing the book, because, you know, the environmental devastation is in the form of floods on the East Coast and wildfires on the West Coast. And definitely we're seeing that now. No, but I didn't think about a pandemic. I thought about it just being, I mean, of course, the pandemic is connected to the environment. However, at that time, when I was writing it, we were experiencing mass floods here in Scarborough, so much so that, you know, you'd see like parking lots completely leveled by them. You can see like park benches like submerged in water. And so I imagined that it was going to be floods. I even bought kayaks for that reason. It was, you know, partly recreation, but also because I was like, we need to train ourselves to get to use these kayaks. Because I remember seeing that there were floods in Calgary, and the people who did have kayaks were able to rescue people from their homes. And that was in my mind, that I was like, I should consider that. I should consider that as a safety measure. So we had 3 kayaks just for safety. And so I wasn't prepared because it just, I felt like I was, it's just that Mother Nature knew best, and Mother Nature was really gonna kick us in the crotch with this one. Like it was a huge surprise. I didn't think about this at all, not at all.
Yeah. I mean, and I think maybe that's to some degree maybe why I've asked this question is because people ask me the same question too. And I just feel more embarrassed by all the things that I did not foretell, by all the things that I got wrong. So maybe I should just really loudly and authoritatively say, of course, this is exactly what I thought.
I need you to just do this with like your suspenders. Yeah, like
but I do have to say, Catherine, I like the idea of kayaks for fun and survival.
Yeah, it's totally going on the list.
It's totally going on the list, totally.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. So one thing that struck me as I read both of your books is that there are stories in the skin of other stories. And what I mean by that is Songs for the End of the World, Saleema's novel. It's quite fun to read because it takes, there's all these different characters and it's a bit of a puzzle where you find yourself trying to figure out like, how do they all fit together? And one of the ways that they fit together is that they actually all have some connection to this specific college campus. And it tickled me because I was like, oh, this is actually a campus novel in the skin of a disaster novel. And I thought that was kind of neat. And then when I was reading Catherine's novel, I have the advantage of having lived in Toronto for many years, but it really felt like secretly a Toronto novel in the skin of a disaster novel, because there's so many places and spaces in Toronto that are just so lovingly and viscerally rendered. And so I was wondering, how did these novels wind up taking the form that they did? Did you start with the disaster and that kind of led to the setting? Or did you start with the setting and then sort of find yourself suddenly writing about these places in disaster? Like, how did it all come together? Do you want to go, Saleema?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So the novel began with, there were sort of two threads. One was I had a bunch of scenarios and characters and unpublished stories, and I wanted to find an interesting way to link them together. And so there were different characters who were already, I had the characters who were the children, Elliot and Sarah, who were the children of two philosophy professors. And I had another story about people, this group of guys, mostly in a philosophy class. And so quickly that became kind of like a nexus. But then the other sort of overarching thing was like, what is the kind of event that could bring them all together? And that was a pandemic, because of course a pandemic links us all in so many ways, the way a virus does. So it came together kind of like that.
So I was right that it was it started with a campus novel. I'm going to give myself a pat on the back. But you did say that you started with the philosophy pieces. And were you surprised when it turned into pandemics? Because was that sort of were you like, how did this happen? I was writing about philosophy students and now I've got this pandemic.
No, there were like the stories and characters I had were pretty disparate. Like there were the sisters on the boat, and so the disaster, the pandemic was there right from the idea of putting them together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Catherine?
It started more from the understanding that QT BIPOC and like other marginalized folks were not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, well, what makes that lack of safety more acute? And I thought lack of resources. And then we know that from history, right? Mm-hmm. And then so what would create lack of resources? And then that's the environmental disaster is where it led to, because again, that was what we were experiencing here in Scarborough was mass flooding. Mm-hmm. So so it went about that way. Yeah. But yeah, and then just that it needed to be Toronto because I thought, I wanted it to feel like it's something that could happen just tomorrow. And I needed it to happen, feel like immediate to my body, especially because Canadians are so good at pretending that bad things only happen in other places.
Yeah. And like I said, there is a real viscerality to the setting in particular that I noticed. And I was wondering, you have a very unusual and beautiful dedication at the beginning of your novel that talks about the nightclub shooting at Pulse in Orlando. Was that something that you were thinking about when you were, did that happen before or after you wrote the book? Like what part did that play in the genesis?
It was actually the Pulse shooting that inspired it in the beginning, because a lot of folks from my community were wondering, should we get a gun? Yeah. Should we learn how to fight back? And then it became the question is well, what's the price of fighting back and what's the price of staying passive? Mm-hmm. So then the entire book was just exploring all the difficult decisions we make in the face of war.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Actually, that's a very good segue to my next question in terms of difficult decisions. I wanted to ask you about the ethics of writing about despair and how you make decisions about that. Crosshairs is very unflinching in its imagination of what could happen, and in some ways what is already happening on a different scale to queer BIPOC people. And then when we look at Songs for the End of the World, Saleema, you had to do so much really sort of fine-tooth comb research into things like the Ebola outbreak and the swine flu outbreak. And so despair winds up being an essential ingredient in both of your books, which sounds like I'm kind of saying something rude, except for the fact that despair is a huge ingredient in my last book. So this is something that I think about a lot. And fiction really, many writers resist this, but fiction really kind of asks for drama in a lot of ways. It asks us to enter drama into the narrative to create stakes and to make it kind of engaging or compelling for the reader. And yet I think what we're always trying to do is to balance that request for drama with sort of making sure that it's not exploitative. And I was wondering how you both do that. Like, how do you kind of write about what you want to write about without it veering into exploitation? Do you have like a code that you follow, or how do you decide when, you know, too much is too much?
That's such a great question. Saleema, do you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's kind of two things occur to me. One was that part of the reason I think it took me so long to, to write this novel, I was working on it for a really long time. I started writing it in 2013, was that it was hard to force myself to write some of that drama in. The original working title of the novel was actually How to Avoid the Plague. Mm-hmm. And so most of my characters were like avoiding the plague. Like they were like kind of getting through a bit like unscathed, like too unscathed for a novel about a pandemic, And so I had to kind of, allow more characters to get sick. I had to really kind of put them through things that I, didn't really want to do ultimately. And part of the process of doing that was kind of looking at, what is a novel telling us about how people are going to behave in a disaster, and sort of the ethics of that responsibility, and trying to kind of hold up some kind of model of what I think could help get us through, so having that kind of like optimistic view of human nature was part of it for me. Like that had to kind of balance the drama for me.
Mm-hmm. And because I have, I think like all writers, a fascination with blocks and where they come from. Do you have the sense of what it was that led to you to resisting kind of doing bad things to these characters?
I mean, I think sometimes you get affectionate about your characters, you care about them. But then also I think part of it too is just, I tend to be more of a character writer than a plot writer. I'd like to be more focused on the drama and things happening. But for a long time while I was writing this, I was interested in their backstories and their fleeting thoughts and less about, the propulsive action that's going to happen on the page.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now I do feel like there's a lot of room for like boring action. I feel like this should be boring action, right? And I feel like maybe this is its moment when we're living through the end of the world and like how much boredom there is, in quarantine, right? And in lockdown, like it's like this major feature. I saw a tweet a little while ago that was like, I didn't think that the apocalypse would involve so little running and so much bread making, Yeah. Anyways, yeah. Next time you want to sit down and write that disaster novel, I feel like you should have full license to have nothing happen, because sometimes that's how it feels.
I hope so. I feel like so much of life unfolds in these moments of nothing happening or feeling like nothing's happening.
Yeah, like time feels so different. So plot means so little we're doing now. I feel like it's just more like the connections between us. So I'm glad you made that decision, Saleema. Mm-hmm. I would say that for me, I really wanted to make sure that the communities I was representing in the novel, because of the fact that it was about the oppression of certain communities, that I wasn't going to be further oppressing them with the work that I was creating, and at the same time being truthful about what genocide looks like, that it's violent, that it's, as you say, it's unflinching. But then I don't want it to be superfluous. Mm-hmm. So, for example, a sexual assault is mentioned but not described. Otherwise, I just feel it ends up just being this macabre fascination with an assault, rather than someone just retelling a story that had happened to her. because we don't need to go there. You just need to understand that it happened, and we don't need to further. Like I feel like almost like as an author, I don't know if you feel the same way, gals, but like I do. I feel like almost like you're hurting your characters. So yeah, and it's so funny for me to say that because the book is quite painful to read. So. Yeah. I have to ask myself. I mean, is this enough? Can you just describe it like this, and then that's it? And I'm glad that I never gave in to, nor did I have any urges to really like hash things out in detail about people's suffering.
Did you have beta readers who helped you with that, or was that sort of all you did?
Yeah, I had 12 of them.
Oh my gosh. Tell us about this.
They're a group of about 12 people who represent different communities, Indigenous, Black, trans communities, Muslims, people who are disabled, from the deaf community, that it was very, very important that I did well by them. So I wanted, because, and that takes, I'm sure you feel that way sometimes when you have beta readers, is that you just feel like you're just really nervous about what they're going to say. But that the thing is that the book is about learning something new.
Yeah.
It's about the pain of learning a new system and a new way of being. And so if I was going to ask the readers to do that, it means that I had to be open-hearted to those people telling me, it's not your story. This is shit. Like, please shut it down. This is horrible. Thankfully, that never happened, but they definitely, almost all of them said, these are the ways you can do better. And I hope I did them proud. I just think that they're all such lovely people. And I'm so glad that they were tough on me.
That's amazing.
I love that what you say, that your book is about learning something new. Did you find that in the process of writing this book about learning something new, that you were learning things that you sort of thought you knew but you didn't know?
It's not necessarily what I didn't know. It's more like what I wasn't willing to accept.
Oh,
so
wow.
The only way that I could really get into the heads of a fascist regime is to really rationalize it. To make that list of like, why would I rationalize it? And then I realized I already do.
Yeah.
I mean, where even like, for example, the computer that, that I'm using to communicate with all of you today, the microphone that I have, it was all created using, like there were marginalized people who are working for next to nothing in order to make this equipment. There are people that, in order for me to eat, before I saw you all today, that food came from a farm where there are people most likely being abused in order to supply the food to us. All of this is important for me to acknowledge, because if I don't acknowledge it, then I can't actually move the book forward. And that when I finally accepted that about myself, I was able to go really deep instead of them being caricatures. Which is so funny because, I mean, racialized people in books are always two-dimensional. Like almost all the time they're two-dimensional. But I'm like, oh, I really want to do really well by these white characters. I just really, really want to get
three-dimensional fascists.
I really want to make sure I get those fascists right. But yeah, so we, like I needed to go there because I had to accept all the ways in which I am part of it and I'm complicit.
Yeah, for sure. I always think about, I don't know if you two have read or seen any of the Hunger Games books or movies, but I always think about how we actually live in the capital, like the capital.
Yeah.
Yes.
So true.
I'm always like, that's where we live. We live in the capital. So yeah, I know, it's definitely something that I think the creation of art really requires us to confront. Which is obviously good for us, and I think hopefully good for our readers too. So one of the things that I thought was really neat about this panel, which I'm so delighted to be moderating, was how both of your books are really vastly different. Like it completely makes sense that you would be on a panel together. Are you doing any more events together in the rest of this literary season?
I don't think so.
Only
No,
the
but
festival who's
Only Ottawa had that
yeah.
genius idea.
brilliant.
But yeah, so your books they're really different, even though they have similar concerns. And yet, when I looked at them again even closer, they have these sort of kind of skeletal similarities at the same time. And one of those similarities is that they're both multivocal novels. And what I mean by that is that they're told in the voices of many different characters. What this means is that we have these ensemble novels that are both about disasters. And it led me to wonder, is there something about a disaster novel that asks for an ensemble novel? And I wondered, did you start with one character and then kind of get pushed outwards to include other voices? And were there some characters who maybe weren't going to be point of view characters and then wound up muscling their way in? Like, how did that work?
Well, I guess I've already sort of talked about this a bit in that, yeah, so it always was a novel with many voices. For me, like that was sort of how it began.
Mm-hmm.
But it proved, complex because with so many characters, it was almost too modular for me. Like I would just like find another character, like a side character or like a side character, and I would want to write about them. And I just kept following these other paths. And there was this urge to write a disaster novel that was like about the ordinary, like what is ordinary life like for the average, person. Like I wanted to have characters who were, they're not the scientists, they're not the government official who's making the decisions. It's just somebody trying to, a single mom trying to live her life, and show what that was like. But then at the same time, there's no way to fit the whole world in. And so there was probably, another novel's worth of material that got cut, like other characters. Like I wanted people on the other side of the world. I wanted people from more backgrounds, people from more socioeconomic backgrounds. But in the end, it was like, there's only so much that can fit, and you have to acknowledge your own lens and the points of views of the characters that are in there. But yeah, you always want to stuff the world in. That was sort of my urge.
Well, it's interesting because listening to you talk about this right now, I'm thinking that actually the structure of your novel is that you could keep on going forever, right? You could, all these people are like connected, and there's one set of people that they're connected because they wind up both sailing the same boat around the world or something like that, right? Like I won't talk about the other connections because I don't want to give anything away. But it was really, like I said, neat, and one of the great delights of your novel is seeing how it all fits together. But it does raise the question of how did you decide, like if you've got these two different groups of people who were on the same boat, why not then include like the person who made the boat or something like that? Like,
no, exactly. It was, and this is where an editor comes in, because at one point I had a chapter that was like there's this husband and wife that are part of a rock band, and then I had a chapter that had a story about one of their roadies. And then I had a chapter that was like the illegitimate child of one of the roadies. Like it was just so many degrees.
So how did you decide like what made the cut and what didn't?
Well, it ultimately was sort of like, right, this is a pandemic novel. This is about the people, that were really affected by the events in the present timeline,
Yeah, so that's what kept, sort of what held things together, the pandemic. Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And what about you, Catherine?
I'd say that I wanted to capture, like when it comes to war, if you think about clusters of people when they gathered in order to share information with each other, that's what I wanted to capture, is that the way that the book is set up is that when they encounter when the protagonist, Kay, encounters someone, then another story is shared. Because I, from what I understand from people who have survived war and genocide, is that in those gatherings, people are able to sort of things such as like, just because you don't have access to information the way you would otherwise, like like radio, newspaper, if you in the case of the novel, people don't have access to their phones, and their identities have been taken away. Is that in that, like, everything has to now go into word of mouth as to what's happening in the world, what's happening in the outside world. So that's how all of the stories are linked together. It's just like then this one person shares like, well, this is what happens in the camps, and then this is what happens when I went into hiding. This is what happens. So yeah, that way you sort of have a full picture as to what the genocidal campaign looks like. Yeah, so it was nice. It was nice to sort of have that picture in my mind, you know.
Yeah. That is really interesting to think about information sharing, and also how much the basis of a community is information sharing. That those stories that were being shared in your novel are a way of creating this full picture, but at the same time, that's also often the basis of so much connection.
Yeah, like what like how do we connect when technology isn't there for us anymore, and when our identities could mean life or death, right? So all of those really big questions. Yeah.
Wonderful. Another way, a funny structural way that your novels are very similar is that, well, I wouldn't say very similar, but a little bit similar, is that they both play with time. You often sort of move away from kind of the central line of plot, the present moment of the story. And in Catherine's novel, I found that this was a way, actually, that I thought one of the ways that cleverly enables you to keep the novel sort of being about horror and suffering, but also showing a great deal of joy, because your protagonist, Kay, has these sort of very warm memories in his life, and moving away from the present moment and going to those places shows the reader that. And then in Saleema's novel, the effect of this moving through time kind of made me think about the ways that our stories are really interlinked, right? And our lives are interlinked often by forces we don't understand. And yet, I thought, this is kind of a gamble. Like, this moving in time is kind of risky. And the reason why it's a gamble is because every time that you move away from the present moment, you're technically taking the reader away from the plot, right? You're taking them away from where they want to be, where it's all happening. And I was wondering, how do you manage like reader discontent? Really, how do you manage the fact that you're sort of taking them away from where they want to go? How do you get away with it?
Oh, there's, you know, when it comes, everyone that I have interviewed who have survived genocide and war, like, it was interesting listening to them, because one side where they would say, just happened out of the blue. Like, I was shopping for baby clothes, and then the next thing I know is that there are these armed trucks coming into the city. Like, so, or, you know, like, I was entering my house, and then all of a sudden my house was bombed, like things like that, right? And then there's this, you know, the dichotomy is it's generations of hatred leading up to this genocidal campaign, which is most definitely what we're seeing around the world. Everything that, all of the unrest, the civil unrest that we're seeing around the world, those fascist regimes are led by generations of hate building momentum, right? So what the reason why time happens like that in the novel is because I wanted the readers to understand that dichotomy, is that everything that you're seeing Kay go through with the renovation, which is the name of the genocidal campaign that unfolds in Canada, is actually, it's built up over a lifetime of transgressions against him as a Black presenting, feminine gay man. So yeah, like I wanted to capture it, and I felt it was worth the investment of going back and forth in time. It just meant that I had to be careful that I wanted to make sure that it was clear, and yet not clear, but not so, you know, that when it's just annoyingly prescriptive, that, look, we're going back in time, everybody get ready, put your helmets on and buckle up. Yeah, you just don't want it to be like Scooby-Doo. I don't know what the term is for that. I'm sure there's a much more technical term for it, but yes.
I think you're thinking of vortex sound.
Yeah, you don't necessarily want that. But I also wanted there to be like this cinematic quality to it, the way that it just changes lenses and filters all of a sudden when you're seeing like a small town in Ontario, like a chicken farming town in Ontario, or the dressing room of Buddies in Bad Times Theater a bit right before a drag show, vastly different worlds all converging together.
Yeah, and so I think so much of our experience really is composed of things moving through time. And I always sort of wish that there was a technology in writing, like text-based writing, text-based storytelling, where you could make many moments happen at once. Like I'm working on this. How can this happen? Because that really is sort of the nature of it. How can we be everywhere at once? Because in actual fact, that's what existence is.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The past is always like with us. And for me, that was part of having these episodes from the past, was to, you know, part of it is like the way that we're all connected, and the way that passing connections can have these effects, these ripple effects for years, that, you know, the way that you might take an action that haunts you, the way something you said to somebody, but, you know, they don't even remember, and like vice versa. And the way those moments are always with us, but how there is still always this possibility of changing them, you know, as long as you're alive, you can go back to that person and make amends, or yeah. And so in a book about a virus that is connecting us and keeping us apart, it was like important for me to like weave in these backstories, these histories.
You know, and even that, I feel almost bad if you, Saleema. I feel like everyone's like, you're like Cassandra. How did you do this? But I think, you know, what you're saying is so true, because like, how many people did you message, you know, at 2 a.m. in like March and April who you hadn't spoken to in 10 years, where you're like, hello, are you all right? You know, like, but I really do find myself doing that a lot. And it often surprised me who I felt like reaching out to.
Yeah. I just want to bring up too, just like this idea, you know, when it comes to connections and past and present, is that sometimes they think about like, and you, I see this definitely in your book as well, Thea, is that just how much luck has to do with our survival, which is terrifying. It's that all it is just, oh my gosh, this one guy just happened to just drive right by me, and he happened to have this, you know, A, B, and C, and that's exactly what I needed in order to do this. And then, I mean, in times like this, I mean, I'm hoping that my book captured it, but it's just like this idea of just like circumstance.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and how, and you realize like how lucky we are to be just like alive and talking to each other, because so many circumstances like could have led us down another path. Yeah, especially like looking at a disaster. Yeah.
I know I talk so often about how stories are magical, but I think maybe life is the actual magic, isn't it? It's how things come to be. So I have one more question, and then we are going to open it up to the floor. So I hope with your questions. I see we have 3 in the Q&A box. Definitely room.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the last question I wanted to ask you was, one thing that struck me about both your books was that they're both kind of a celebration and an ode to a completely different form of art, which is music, and a lot of the really transcendent moments that happen in both of your novels involve music. And so I wanted to know, what kind of music were you listening to when you wrote your books? Maybe you were listening to it as you were writing, or listening to it to get ready to write, or thinking of it while you were writing.
Oh my goodness.
Well, yeah, I was listening to, because I was writing this for so many years, I was listening to so much music, like every artist I've ever enjoyed, basically. You know, like a lot of indie rock and folk music. But one sort of funny sort of musical thing was I write, or used to write, in a cafe pretty often that, you know, had a really great vinyl collection. And one of the records that they would often play while I was writing was by this band called Tennis. And I remember looking them up at one point. I'm like, what is this record? I really like it. And I found out that it's like a husband and wife indie rock duo who also bought a boat and were living on a boat. And of course, in my book, I have characters who are in a band, and there's a boat, and it all felt very like, you know, synchronicity. So that was one band I listened to. Tennis.
I was going to ask you, that was actually a follow-up question, nosy follow-up question. So there is a rock band, is one of the characters in Saleema's novel, Dove Sweet. And I was like, who is Dove Sweet based on? While I was reading it. Was it based on any, because there is a rock band called Doves. But I was like, is this based on any particular group, or were they completely fictional?
They're completely fictional. I mean, I think it was, inspired by some of the bands I like Arcade Fire.
Oh, right, Married. Got it. Didn't even
Yeah.
think
Yeah, they're totally fictional.
What about you, Catherine? And I should say, there is a very beautiful poem, which I guess is its own form of song, in the middle of your novel, by your partner too, which I thought was
Yeah, it was it was originally another poem that I had written, and I'm so glad that my partner agreed to put that poem in instead, because I think it captured the spirit of that protest, not to give too much away. And I really wanted it to come from them, and not from me. But yeah, like when it comes to music, so I can't listen to music during, like while writing. I've never done that. It just doesn't feel right to like be listening to something else, because it feels like I'm listening to the characters talking. And I feel like it's just like, put your music down, but it's like you're the person who's playing the music. It doesn't make any sense. So I like silence, or like being in nature. But then after a bout of writing, and people understand this when they read the novel, is that I really would go into like full like mourning. So I'd walk the lake and just bawl my eyes out, just because what happens in the book is so is very much like what could happen to QT BIPOC folks at any moment. We always feel like we're in danger. I know a lot of my trans kin and chosen family feel that way as well. And so when I would be in mourning, I would listen to like drag anthems, like these really, really good songs that if I were a drag queen, that I would perform. Deborah Cox's how did you get
Oh,
here?
wow.
Yeah, so that one was like on repeat, like while bawling my eyes out and driving, like, finish the novel, just finish it. I mean, because you know what it's like, you just develop such a beautiful relationship with everybody, and then you're taking them down horrible paths. So that's what I did. I had morning music, very Scorpio. It's like, that's what I did.
I do really like that image of you weeping and listening to Deborah Cox. I wish there was a book trailer that could include that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to our audience questions. So the first question I want to read you is from Letitia, and this made me giggle because I'm like, Letitia, either you are a writer or you know a writer, because the question is, are you missing doing a book tour, or are you relieved?
Ooh, oh my gosh. Okay, so I am chronically ill.
Oh.
And so when I go and do book tours, I have to do this very big smile, and then I just nod when people like reach out their hand, and I'm always like, that's a really, really nice hand, and I can't shake their hand. Or I've been trying to do the elbow thing. Nobody ever gets it. But people really like hugging, they like touching and all this stuff. And it's just like, and so even if I have a sign like, please don't touch me, please ask permission to take my photo, all this stuff, people don't listen. So I'm and in all honesty, I do have a very long list of people who stalk me. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, like, I'm so happy that we're still able to do this. And there's 60 people watching right now. They're kind enough to tune in. Is that I just make sure that in the book tour, this virtual tour, is that people are still getting the same experience, if not better, interacting with us online. It just means that you can't like reach out and touch us and that kind of thing. That's the only thing. I'm still like signing books at every bookstore. It's just but I'm relieved. I'm actually relieved for my own safety. Like.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, I think this is a point that has been raised a lot over the past 5 or 6 months, how so much of everything going virtual has increased accessibility in such a meaningful way, and in a way that is probably unexpected for people who don't live with a disability or who are temporarily abled, as we say. And that's interesting to think about here, right? How we can still connect with each other without some of the kind of vibes that might be stressors for writers.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What about you, Saleema?
Well, there's real upsides as well as downsides. So, I mean, I tend to be pretty shy, so I get nervous being up on a stage. So it's amazing to be able to talk to people from my own study. Like, that makes me feel so much more comfortable. But of course, I miss out on like hanging out with other writers, meeting readers in person. I love traveling. Like, I was looking forward to traveling across Canada and seeing my friends in other cities. So that part of it is sad. But like you say, the accessibility is so cool. And I've been able to like attend all these events in Toronto, like tune into other events in, New York, Toronto, London. And that's really cool because like in Montreal, we're often like a little bit outside of the, English language literature scene. So yeah.
Yeah, we could have all had like hummus together, like the usual green room hummus and celery and sandwiches. All of those things we could have had, and when it's so sad to have lost that. But yeah, it's true. Like, that's one thing. It's like the gathering. Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's the thing. It's like having dinner together before an event. I really miss that.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's definitely bittersweet because I think it allows you to connect with readers and with other writers in a new way that has other dimensions of intimacy that face-to-face doesn't have. But yeah, it is this kind of complex thing, which is very fitting for your novel, Saleema, right? Because I feel like that's very much about the bittersweetness of disaster. Okay, so here we go. A question from Corey. I think this is a very clever question. Has the public reaction to the pandemic surprised you? So I like the specificity of that. Like, of all the things to be surprised by, has the way that people have responded publicly surprised you?
Well, the sort of virulence of the anti-mask movement has surprised me. Like, I know that there was an anti-mask movement in the 1918 flu pandemic, and you sort of would think, okay, we would be like past that. But of course, that's been enabled by Trump and all of that horror. So that sucks. But the way there have been like the amazing like Black Lives Matter, like all those people, thousands of people out in the street, the way that a pandemic has of like showing you all the cracks in a society, and some of the mobilization that can come out of that has been fascinating.
Yeah. What's really what made me very nervous was Trump's because, and I don't want to give it away in the book, but Trump's visit to Kenosha. That was, for me, I was sitting at home praying, going, oh my God, please don't let this happen. Because I thought that's going to be, if things go wrong there, that's going to be the beginning of a civil war. And we know that it's impending. It's like, it's this imminent disaster that they're all facing. Yeah, that for me, I knew that if there was going to be a lack of resources, there was going to be civil unrest. And so kind of like none of this is really surprising me. But yeah, the anti-mask movement, like I didn't, when it comes to pandemics, because like that's not what my book is about. It's not about a pandemic, but like when you think about like, oh, we're not going to die from a virus, but it's just people's stupidity. Yeah. Like that to me, like, is just like, that's really out of left field. Like I'm amazed by that. I'm still like, you go to bed at night going, wow, this is really gonna happen. Huh? Oh, we're gonna die. Yeah. Because of people's silly choices. That I certainly did not see that coming.
Yeah. Strange times for sure.
Strange times.
Let's see. Here we go. Question from Kat. From concept to publishing, how long was the process for both of your books? I feel like we've touched on that very slightly, but we could probably be a little bit more specific. I know, Saleema, I've heard the number 7 for you.
Yeah. So I started writing it in 2013, But I think I kind of did that first outline at the end of 2012. So a really, really long time.
And then when did you send it to your editor? Like at what point was it sort of out of your hands? What year?
Oh, well, it was with like a lot, part of, at least half of the process was working with an editor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've probably spent as long, editing it and like writing all of this extraneous, stuff, because I think it was actually accepted in 2016.
Okay. So
Yeah.
was your editor one of the forces that was like, no, you're not allowed to write about the roadie? Or
Yes, exactly. Thank goodness. Well, she never said I couldn't write it, but just then, at a certain point, it became evident that it did not belong there through her gentle, helpful questioning.
Oh, all of those orphans. Oh, those editing orphans, like when they get tossed to the side. So sad, so sad.
Oh. And would you say, Saleema, that this is like your timeline in general for a project? Or do you think like the next one's going to be faster? Or the next one's going to take twice as long?
Oh, no. The plan is for the next one to be faster, for sure. That is what I hope and pray.
I'm a slow writer. That's why I asked. I'm always looking for other slow writers. What about you, Catherine?
I'd say, so from the, was the year 2017? No, it was 2016 until now. Yeah, that I started just conceptualizing it, and it was sort of, I always think of it like the word sort of in the back of your mouth, like, like you're chewing cud, and then finally, yeah, I'm a writer. Yeah. I was like just thinking about it for maybe about 6 months to a year, and then finally finished the first draft in 2018 spring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're a faster writer. Okay.
Yeah, it was actually the final day of the Festival of Literary Diversity, and I'm like, I really want to get that one event at 4:00 to see Cherie Dimaline on stage, and so I spent the entire day writing, and finally got the last chapter, and then ran to the event. And that was like the first draft. Of course, like it went through like a lot of editing from then on, but. Yeah, I think it was just because it just felt like I couldn't write the book fast enough because I could already see things unfolding, especially since, with Trump and everything. So yeah, I felt like I write it, just keep on writing.
Mm-hmm. I like to imagine that somebody finished a novel this afternoon because they were like, gotta get to see Saleema Nawaz and Catherine Hernandez, gotta finish my novel. So
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I think this will probably be our last question, or maybe we have time for two more, we'll see. But Doriana is asking, what books have you been reading or can you recommend this fall season?
It's been a while since I've finished a book. I've been finding it hard to read. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
It has been difficult. I am okay for the Giller long list. I am all team Suvankam.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
yes,
so
that book is amazing.
Yeah, How to Pronounce Knife. Everyone should read it. Okay, it's really good. Yeah, and it was wonderful to read it at the very beginning of the pandemic, just because while it's quite that there's a lot of heavy reading, and it's actually quite lighthearted and joyous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I know, I put money on that one. I told my friends, I was like, this is going to be on the Giller list, but I only put like figurative money, not actual money, and then I was mad. Yeah. Okay, let's see. What have I been reading? I actually am about to, haven't yet read, but I have heard great things about Luster by Raven Lalani. So that's an American book.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm reading that with my book club next. So yeah.
Nice.
Let's see. Have we got time for one more? Okay, maybe one more. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, this is not a quick question at all. But here's a just kind of a funny question. Could you tell us in advance what your next works will be, since both your novels are prescient about life today, just so we have time to prep?
Oh yeah, I'm writing a novel about these farm workers who are trying to create a world for their child because they know that she won't have like a life outside of the farm.
She won't have a life outside of the farm. Do you want to say why is that?
Yeah, it's like as in they're trying to imagine a life for her that she'll never have because they're basically they're migrant workers. Yeah.
So it's probably something that does involve preparation for our shared future.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Another light read.
And what have you got? What's coming down the pike for you?
Yeah, I'm working on something. I'm working on a musical set in the Romantic period. So everything has already happened. It's nothing to do with the future. So I'm feeling kind of superstitious. So I'm just like keeping it to the past.
Is it a musical like for the stage or
that is the goal.
Oh wow! Oh, amazing!
Yeah,
amazing.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Saleema and Catherine, for this wonderful conversation. And thank you to the Ottawa Writers Festival for having us. And if you enjoyed this event, make sure to tune in a week's time for the next event in this series with Kai Kalo and Ian Williams are going to be talking about inheritance. So thank you so much. And thank you so much to everybody who tuned in and for the wonderful questions. I had a wonderful time.
Thank you, Thea. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you both of
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.